It's 4 p.m. and we're bringing you the developing news and the stories behind the headlines. This is Storycon. I'm Patrick Paez. Here are some of the stories we're watching this Thursday, June 6. The legal team of Alice Go has filed an urgent motion to lift the Bamban mayor's preventive suspension. The Office of the Ombudsman suspended Go for 6 months. That's over her alleged links with Pogo in her municipality. A recent Okta survey shows majority of Filipinos see China as the biggest threat. 76% of the respondents named the superpower and our neighbor as the nation that poses most danger to the Philippines. Russia was a far second with 9%. And authorities raided a supposed Pogo hub in Porac, Pampanga on Wednesday. Over 150 foreigners and 36 Filipino workers were rescued from the area. Some of them were allegedly kidnapped. In Parañaque, the Bureau of Immigration has arrested about 37 nationals or Chinese nationals in a subdivision. The Bureau of Immigration said the foreigners were unable to provide the necessary documents to prove the legitimacy of their business. Joining us today, Ana Marie Pamintuan, Editor-in-Chief of the Philippine Star, and Storycon's resident political pundit, Ronald Llamas. Ronald,
Good afternoon, Ami.
ilang araw ng resident ka? not de facto. Oo, not de facto.
Tatanong ko nga kay Ami kung ano ibig sabihin nun.
Iyon. Atin natin na lang yun. Bubulong ko na lang si Ami. Okay. Ami, it seems like a slow news day today. So what do you have on the front pages of the Philippine Star for tomorrow?
We're waiting for reports from Davao. Nandun naman ngayon si President Marcos on another meeting with troops sa Davao de Oro naman. And there's a forum, Coast Guard forum in Davao, ibang parte naman ng Davao, where the Soldier and Solicitor General is attending at sabi niya, ang Pilipinas daw wants a peaceful and rules-based adherence to the international order.
Okay.
Yung mga ganyan. Saka of course, maulan na naman ngayon, southwest monsoon hanggang weekend daw, maulan. Kaya talaga rainy season na. Saka nabanggit niya si Alice Go. Mukhang na-inspire yata paglabas ng SALN niya, no? Merong lawyer ngayon na naghihingi rin ng SALN ni Vice President Sara Duterte.
Ayun
So we will see kung ano maging reaction sana. Pati yung ibang opisyal, hinga na rin ng SALN, ano?
I know, Ami, there was also this story that we monitored about the Philippine Coast Guard requesting the United States Coast Guard for the joint patrols in the West Philippine Sea. I wonder if you have the same story, if you've come across the same story.
We're still waiting for reports from the Coast Guard. Pero sa ngayon, merong report din, additional dun sa Ayungin, na the China Coast Guard daw also tried to prevent our troops from evacuating a soldier who was injured doon sa may Ayungin. So yung mga details niyan, we're still waiting for it this afternoon.
So, last year, lumabas na yung issue na yan, ng joint patrol.
Yeah.
Tinanggihan niya lang Coast Guard at Navy. Sabi nila,
Which Coast Guard? Our Coast Guard?
Our Coast Guard. Sabi nila na kaya na namin on our own. No?
So there was an offer from the United States Coast Guard.
Yes.
But what we're hearing this time is that there's a
Ngayon,
request or there's a request from the Philippine Coast Guard. Anong ramifications yan, Ronald? My first question is the United States Coast Guard allowed or permitted to patrol outside its territorial waters?
Hindi ko alam yung rules ng US Coast Guard. No? Pero tingin ko ay may opening dyan at this point. Hindi lamang dahil sa may mga joint balikatan tayo. Hindi lamang dun sa tensions with China. Tingin ko ay ginagawa nila yan pati sa mga ibang mga Pacific Islands.
Okay.
Tumutulong sila. Fiji,
I guess
Marshall Islands. No?
I guess what applies here in this situation would be freedom of navigation.
Yes.
Diba? Na those international waters are open to all ships of all flags, right? Yes. Except that yung yung territory na yan, territorial waters ng China. That's what they're
Yun yung claim ng China.
nila. Yun. Oh. Oho. Okay.
Abangan natin ngayon yan. Pero hindi ba, Ronald, kapag ganyan, kapag pumasok yung superpower, mawawala yung advantage natin na sinasabi nga nila, in this asymmetrical confrontation, David versus Goliath, mawawala yung ganong advantage natin. Kasi magiging head-to-head na yan, palakihan na yan ng barko.
Yes, kaya depende rin kung ano kasi yung klase ng tulong. Iba kasi kung ang tutulong dyan ay US Navy, no? At iba rin kung Coast Guard to Coast Guard. It's basically civilian, no? Unlike yung Chinese Coast Guard na under the military. Kaya depende na yan kung paano yan i-spin ng mga Philippine Star.
Okay, Ronald,
Yan yung
Abby?
gray zone nila. Siguro tanungin natin yung guest natin.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
We have today as our resource, former Supreme Court Senior Justice Antonio Carpio. Pleasure to have you over here at Storycon. Justice Carpio.
Good
Good afternoon,
afternoon.
Justice.
Good afternoon, Ami. Good
Justice.
afternoon, Patrick. Good afternoon, Ronald.
Oh, maybe the Justice knows. Justice, what are the legal ramifications of the U.S. Coast Guard patrolling the West Philippine Sea? Are there any?
Well, in our exclusive economic zone, in any exclusive economic zone, there's freedom of navigation and overflight. So any Coast Guard of any country can sail through the exclusive economic zone. But in this case, if the U.S. and other like-minded states will sail in the South China Sea or even just in the West Philippine Sea, that has a great significance because what China is saying, everything within the 10-dash line is national territory of China. So if it's national territory of China, then before you can enter that the 10-dash line, you have to ask the permission of China, which is actually the regulation now of China. So if the U.S. and its allies will sail, whether it's their Navy or Coast Guard, then that is in fact telling China, no, you are wrong. This is not your national territory. This is not your territorial waters. These are the exclusive economic zone of coastal countries like the Philippines. And in effect, they're actually enforcing the arbitral award because when they pass through the West Philippine Sea, they're telling China, we can do this, we can sail here because this is the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines in accordance with the arbitral award. And in the exclusive economic zone, there's freedom of navigation and overflight, and we can conduct naval drills. So they, in fact, enforce the arbitral award in that sense. That's why I've been saying, let's invite all these navies and coast guards of the world to sail in the West Philippine Sea. Because, in effect, they're refuting the position, they're rebutting the position of China.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, Justice. I think that if I'm wrong, no, is the only difference between our Coast Guard or the U.S. Coast Guard and the Chinese Coast Guard patrolling those waters is the difference that China, on the basis of its claim that its territorial waters can make apprehensions and we cannot.
Well, China is claiming that they can arrest, but that's just a claim. I mean,
yes.
that doesn't mean that it's legal.
Right.
And if they do arrest our fishermen, then we will go to the tribunal and they will surely lose. There's no way they can win because that's an exclusive economic zone. You know, the South China Sea is also huge. About 20 to 25% of the waters in the middle are high seas. High seas belong to all mankind. No state can own the high seas. And there's freedom of navigation and overflight. There's even freedom of fishing for all coastal and landlocked states. So even people from Nepal theoretically can fish in the high seas of the South China Sea. In other words, it's part of the global commons. What China is saying, that those global commons belong to China. So it's a grand theft of the global commons by China. So the antidote to this is to ask the rest of the world to sail in the South China Sea. Just so they are actually voting on their feet or voting with their sails when they sail in the South China Sea.
With this proposed joint patrols between our Coast Guard and the U.S. Coast Guard, Di ba, Justice, mapipigilan yung threat ng China na manghuli ng mga Pilipino trespassers sa kanilang territorial waters, halimbawa sa Ayungin? Kung sakaling mangyari ito, ibig sabihin yung kanilang threat last month will just be an empty threat. Ibig sabihin, mapapahiya sila. So,
That's it.
will they do everything para ma-implement yung threat? Para maipakita that they can enforce it? Dahil kung hindi nila ma-enforce, magmumukha silang kahihaya.
That's it. That's why I said it's an overreach. And lately, the Chinese announced that we don't have to worry because they will not arrest our fishermen. They walk back, actually, because they know it cannot be implemented. And if they implement it, they will have to implement it against everyone. No? And they have to arrest the fishermen not only from the Philippines, but from Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and even Brunei, if there are people from Brunei who still fish. No? But it's something that definitely China cannot enforce. First of all, China said anyone who enters or exits the waters within the 10-dash line will have to ask our permission. Otherwise, we will arrest and seize those vessels. They cannot do that to the U.S. Navy, to the U.S. Coast Guard. That's why the best way to stop this claim of China is just to send all the navies of the world and all the Coast Guards of the world to the South China Sea. And China cannot do anything, and so their entire claim will collapse.
Justice, there are questions about the nature of the China Coast Guard. You're aware that they are under their maritime command, which is under Xi Jinping, and they are authorized actually to engage in combat maneuvers, to engage other vessels in combat. Are you aware of international rules governing the nature of Coast Guards? Meron ba diyang mga common rules? Is China actually authorized to give those functions to its Coast Guard, which is supposed to be civilian, di ba?
Well, it depends on the internal law. China's Coast Guard used to be separate from its military. Now it's under the military command. So it's actually part of the People's Liberation Army. It's under the chain of command of the military. But there are other countries also like that. But we used to be like that, but we separated it during the time of President Ramos. We separated the Coast Guard from the military, so it's now civilian, so that we can actually now ask loans from Japan, because Japan will not give loans to the military, but only to civilian agencies. So it depends on the law of each country. Whether the Coast Guard will be under the military or it's a civilian agency. In the U.S., it's civilian during peacetime, but it is under the U.S. Navy in wartime.
Yeah.
So it's possible for us actually to go back to the former functions of the Coast Guard before Fidel Ramos's time, meaning pwede siyang similar to the China Coast Guard na merong ganyan, law enforcement functions. They call it law enforcement actually.
Yeah, it can be done, but we've decided that we can keep it civilian in character so that it can receive foreign aid and foreign loans.
Yeah. Justice, on a different note, yung government natin ay nagsasabi na naghahanda silang mag-file ng case again sa UNCLOS against China based on environmental grounds. Di ba mas mahirap ito kaysa dun sa final natin sa UNCLOS na magkasama tayo sa Den Haag nung ating sinampa sa UNCLOS. Pero di ba mas simple yung kaso na yon kaysa dito sa environmental case, dahil kinakailangan mo ng maraming scientific basis para ipakita na talagang wasak yung environment sa ating EEZ, na kinakailangan ng mas maraming research. Anong tingin nyo dito sa planong ito?
Well, actually, the first arbitration, in a way, simple and yet complex party also, kasi you have to divide it in two parts. The first part was whether the 9-dash line was compatible, was legal under UNCLOS. Madali lang yan because that's just a purely legal issue, no?
Yeah.
So the other one, we also said that China destroyed the marine environment, and we had to present marine scientific studies. There has to be an assessment by marine scientists that there was actually damage to the marine ecosystem. And we commissioned foreign marine biologists to do this. And that is the number one condition. If we want to file an environmental case against China, we have to get at least one, I recommend two, marine scientific studies, one by foreign experts and another by our local experts, so that they will say that the damage was done by men. It's a man-made damage and not by a typhoon or a storm, because, of course, it has to be an assessment because we don't know what happened. There's no eyewitness, no? We don't have a video footage of the destruction. So it will have to be the marine biologists who will examine and investigate whether this was the destruction of the coral reefs was caused by a typhoon, no? Or not, or by humans. So that is the essential thing. Before we file, we must have this. If we don't have it, then let's not file.
Yeah.
That's what I recommend to the government. Get a marine scientific assessment, because we did that in the first arbitration.
Yeah.
Justice, just to refresh everyone's memory, I remember nag-file na ng environmental case si former Foreign Secretary Albert Del Rosario together with Conchita Carpio Morales. It was an environmental case against China, but they specifically named Xi Jinping, right? Could you just refresh us kung ano na yung nangyari doon? I remember mukhang na-dismiss, di ba? Kung sakali magpa-file tayo, ano kaya, what should we do differently?
Well, that was not an environmental case because that was with the ICC, International Criminal Court. The environmental case, you have to file it with UNCLOS, with an UNCLOS tribunal.
Yes.
So it's a separate body. So that one was a crime against humanity.
Yes.
Because they destroyed the source of food of a large group of people. Union basis,
Yes.
because you destroy the marine environment, then you destroy the livelihood and source of food of people. That is a crime against humanity. But dito sa atin, when you actually destroy the marine environment, that is a crime in itself, no? Under UNCLOS, that's a violation of UNCLOS. It may or may not be a crime, but it's a violation of UNCLOS.
Okay, Justice Carpio, I wonder if you monitored in the President's speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue, there was a mention of the Paris Treaty. I understand from Ronald here, it was the first time that a Philippine president has ever mentioned the Paris Treaty in the context of our claims in the West Philippine Sea. Justice, can you tell us what the significance of this is? What utility does it have in our claims?
That's very significant. It's one of the most significant events that really happened lately, because if you look at our history, if you look at the PhilJa Journal, the Philippine journal, the Journal of the Philippine Judicial Academy, there's an article there by former Solicitor General Estelito Mendoza. And he said that the Philippines never had sovereignty over the KIG, over the Spratlys, until 1978, when President Marcos issued PD 5096. Creating the Calayan Island Group. So he said, our territory is limited to the islands within the Treaty of Paris lines. That was what Estelito Mendoza said, that we never owned through the centuries the Spratlys. It was only in 1978 that we claimed it under PD 5096. 78 is rather late, where you're a Johnny come lately if you base your claim starting 1978. So that's Estelito Mendoza. And then you have Father Bernas, the Dean of the Ateneo Law School, who said that Philippine territory is limited to the islands within the treaty lines. If we have to claim the Spratlys, we must use other principles of international law, not treaty law. It cannot be based on a treaty, because the Treaty of Paris limited the the territory ceded by Spain to the U.S. to the islands within the treaty lines.
Archipelago.
And Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys are outside the treaty lines. And you have, if you go to YouTube now, you'll see Senator Enrile saying, wag na natin pag-usapan yung Scarborough. Hindi sa atin yan, squatter lang tayo dyan. That's outside the Treaty of Paris lines. That's not our territory. So, all of these narratives by these legal luminaries convinced China that Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys are outside Philippine territory. And that's why when Foreign Minister Wang Yi in 2016, February 2016, before the arbitral award was issued, he spoke at the CSIS, that's the leading think tank in Washington, before diplomats from all over the world. He showed there the Treaty of Paris lines, showing the islands within the Paris of Treaty lines and showing Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys outside. He said, see, this is the 118 degrees longitude of the Treaty of Paris. All islands to the west, West Philippine Sea, do not belong to the Philippines. All islands to the west of this 118 degrees longitude line of the Treaty of Paris. And so the Philippines has no basis at all in claiming. And in fact, the Chinese are quoting Estelito Mendoza. So this has created, some other writers in Western journals, and really it pains me to read them and say that we are a late claimant. We only base it in 1978. And if we base it in 1978, we're too late the hero, too late to the party, because China claimed it in 1947 in their China Handbook of 1947. So, but these are all wrong.
Okay.
This narrative,
if I may,
as stated by Estelito Mendoza, Dean Bernas, and Senator Enrile, are factually, legally, historically false.
okay.
Why?
So, Justice, then it begs the question: why was it included? Why was it mentioned in the speech by the president?
Because when
at the Shangri-La
after signing the Treaty of Paris, so the Americans came here, and the Spanish garrisons in Cagayan de Sulu, Cebuto, Mapun Island refused to vacate. They said, if you look at the Treaty of Paris lines, we are outside the Treaty of Paris lines because there was a mistake. In the Treaty of Paris, there were fixed coordinates, longitude, latitude of all the lines. So they drew the lines, and there were certain islands like in Cagayan de Sulu and Cebuto outside the line. So the Spanish garrison there refused to move. So they said, we are outside the treaty lines. So the Americans went back to the Spaniards, said, look, our intention was the entire Philippine archipelago should be ceded to the U.S. So let's clarify, sign a treaty again to clarify.
Washington.
The Spaniards refused. The Americans, after a long, acrimonious exchange of notes verbal,
So,
finally the Americans said, okay, to cut this short, we will pay you an additional $50,000 on top of the $20 million that we paid
To
for
move
the
the line.
islands within the treaty lines.
to move the line.
The
Yes.
Spaniards said, that's too little. So the Americans doubled it to 100,000, and the Spaniards said, agree, we will sign. So the second treaty was signed 2 years later. 1898 Treaty of Paris, 1900 Treaty of Washington.
Yeah.
There's only one article in the Treaty of Washington. Spain also cedes to the U.S. any and all islands
outside.
belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines of the Treaty of Paris. So it included all islands of the Philippine archipelago outside the lines. So the question is, what are the islands of the Philippine
Yes.
archipelago outside the lines? Where is that document? Where is that map? We go to 3 maps. 1734 Murillo Velarde map, because it says
Yes.
that Panacot, that's Scarborough. It says that Los Baos de Paragua, those are the Spratlys. The second, and that's an official map of Philippine territory as of 1734, because of the, you see there in the cartouche on the upper right-hand side, the
Justice, that's the map behind you, di ba?
yeah, that's it.
That's the map behind you.
Yeah, you will
Yeah.
see here, the cartouche,
Yeah.
that's the Royal Crown of Spain. That means it's an official map.
Yes.
Okay,
Yun. That's the map
that's
behind
it.
them.
That's the map.
The Velarde map.
Yes.
Yeah,
So-
the Bolívar Velarde
Owned
map.
by
The second map is the 1808. The 1808 is also an official Spanish, the second official Spanish map of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime. And it's more precise now because Scarborough Shoal is there with depth soundings. Because Alessandro Malaspina came here to Manila in 1792 and went straight to Scarborough to conduct a depth sounding.
Yes.
Ni-measure niya yung depth of all the rocks so to guide navigators. And that's why there is that in 1808 map, you see the depth soundings there, the survey of Malaspina. And then the last map of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime, the 1875 Carta General del Archipelago Filipino. And when the Americans came here, they did not have a map of the Philippines. They adopted in toto the 1875 Carta General of the Spaniards because it was the most complete map. You can see Scarborough Shoal there, and you can see the entire Spratlys. You can see Tito. Tito Island is there. Tito Island is
Yes.
Pagasa. You can see
Pagasa.
Ituaba. Ituaba is there. Everything, and with depth soundings.
So,
With depth measurements of the depth around the islands to guide navigators. So this is really the complete map of Philippine territory. When you ask the question, what are the islands of the Philippine archipelago outside the lines of the Treaty of Paris? This is the map. Okay?
So-
And in the Islas Palmas case, that's the famous case between the Netherlands and the U.S. over the island of Palmas off the coast of Mindanao in the Philippine Sea, because the Spaniards discovered the island and put it in the 1875 map. But the Spaniards never returned to the island. It was the Dutch East India Company that went there and signed a treaty with the locals. There were about 700 people living there. So the Datu, the local chieftain, pledged allegiance to the Netherlands. And so two countries claim now the Islas Palmas, and they submitted it to arbitration by Max Huber, a very famous case. This is a very famous international law case. And Max Huber said, discovery alone is not sufficient. You have to continuously display peaceful sovereignty over the territory to complete your title. And it was the Dutch that did that. So Max Huber awarded Islas Palmas to the Dutch, and it's now part of Indonesia.
yeah.
But
So,
in that case, the Americans, to prove that Islas Palmas is part of the Philippines, submitted the 1875 map. 1875 map. And in their memorandum, submitted to the judge, to Max Huber, they said, this 1875 map is an official map of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime and now during the American regime. So there you are. That's why this map is very important, because the Americans and the Spaniards said this is the map of Philippine territory. That was the subject of the Treaty of Washington. And the Treaty of Washington, there's a phrase there, and this cession of these islands outside the treaty lines retroact in cession, in ownership, up to the date of the Treaty of Paris. So when you look at the Treaty of Paris, you have to think that there are islands outside also. Because the Treaty of Washington said that this cession in 1900 of the islands outside the treaty lines are deemed incorporated into the Treaty of Paris.
yeah.
Okay, Ron?
So that's why,
is,
but of course, that's not the narrative that our
Yes.
legal luminaries have been saying all along.
Yeah.
And the Chinese have
Use that. Have used that.
followed our legal luminaries that
Yeah.
the Philippine territory is limited to the islands within the treaty lines. That's why when President Marcos Jr., for the first time in Philippine history, said that the Philippine territory is regulated by the Treaty of Paris as that was amplified, clarified, and amended by the Treaty of Washington.
Yeah.
So nabuo na for the first
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
This clarifies to the whole world, and that is factually, legally, and historically correct. That is our narrative. That is the correct story of the Philippines.
So, Justice, you would say that very important detail was probably the biggest thing that to come out of the President's speech in Shangri-La Dialogue.
Yes,
In
in my
relation-
view,
in relation,
that
Justice,
was
sa
the
tanong ni
watershed
Patrick,
moment where he clarified Philippine territory that's directly directed at China.
Yeah. So
Should we
Justice,
still
in relation
amplify
dun
it,
sa
Justice?
in relation
The
sa
funny
tanong ni
thing is
Patrick,
this.
the
In the
President,
arbitration at The Hague,
yeah.
China said, we are not participating, but this is our position. Philippine territory is regulated by 3 treaties, as stated in the 1935 Philippine Constitution, Treaty of Paris, Treaty of Washington, and the treaty with the British demarcating our
Yes.
boundary in southern Philippines between southern Philippines and British North Borneo. They mentioned the Treaty of Washington. So they're bound by the Treaty of Washington. They said Philippine territory is also regulated by the Treaty of Washington, but they didn't read the text of the Treaty of Washington. So they said Philippine territory is regulated by 3 treaties, Treaty of Paris, Treaty of Washington, and Treaty with the British, and all these islands can only be found within the treaty lines.
Yeah.
They misread or did not read. They were misled by our legal luminaries. And that position paper under the law, that is a judicial admission, the highest form of admission. So they admit that our territory is regulated also by the Treaty of Washington, and that binds them.
So, Justice, in relation sa tanong ni Patrick, the President, in his keynote speech sa Shangri-La Forum, listened more to your framework than to the framework of his chief legal advisor, Secretary Enrile. No?
Wala namang laban. Talagang mali naman yung kwento nila.
You're putting the justice on a spot.
Talagang mali
Yun naman,
naman
yun naman talaga nangyari.
Klaro naman eh.
Yun naman talaga
Kaya lang,
nangyari.
but our problem is, even our own historians forgot about the Treaty of Washington. And if you look at the internet, if you go to the internet, you see the Philippine territory nasa loob ng Treaty of Paris lines. And that has been the impression of everybody. So, mali talaga. And it has misled China.
Okay, Justice, sorry for a stupid question, but bottom line, Justice, the Treaty of Paris actually gives us more territory, more claim over what, Scarborough and Spratlys, or
The Washington,
The Washington.
The Treaty of Washington,
Treaty of Washington.
for purposes of the West Philippine Sea dispute, what is important is the Treaty of Washington.
Right. Which is, in a way, you could call an amendment to the Treaty of Paris. Something like that.
2 years later,
A correction,
but
a
in that
revision.
amendment, they said all these islands are deemed ceded to the U.S. as of the date of the Treaty of Paris.
Okay.
So when you look at the map, you must have a box there for Scarborough
Right.
Shoal and for the Spratlys. And that's what I told the NAMRIA, because the NAMRIA circulated a proposed new map of the Philippines, and the treaty lines are still there, and they did not indicate there the Treaty of Paris. They listed all the treaties except the Treaty of Washington. So the most important treaty now, because that's what's in dispute, is the Treaty of Washington. But in their listing, in the legend of the map, they missed out the Treaty of Washington. So I told them, please include the Treaty of Washington, because without the Treaty of Washington, how do we prove that we have sovereignty over Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys, the KIG?
Justice,
So
does
should we
this
be
treaty-
amplifying this more? For
Yes.
example, the DFA, the missions of the Philippines all over the world, should they be amplifying this detail na
Yes.
ngayon lang na-highlight?
Yeah, that's why this is very important. This speech of the president saying that Philippine territory is determined, laid down in the Treaty of Paris as amplified, as amended by the Treaty of Washington. That should be the marching order now. This is the first time there is such a declaration by the president.
Yes.
The president is the chief architect of foreign policy. This involves foreign policy now. So all our embassies, consulates should echo this now. This should be our narrative.
Okay. It's like throwing a monkey wrench on the whole
Yeah.
West Philippine Sea discussion
Yeah.
now, no? So I guess this bit of news delights you, former Justice, Justice Carpio.
Yeah, music to my
good news.
ears.
But I wonder, Justice, whether a treaty between two countries, no, the United States and Spain, can it hold other countries like China, for example?
Yes, because there is this principle in international law, ut possidetis juris. As you possess under the law, stay there. If you look at the map of Africa and South America, you will see that the boundaries are drawn in straight lines
Right.
of these countries. And one tribe may straddle both sides of the boundary. Now, if you allow them to fight, to redraw their boundary, there will be perpetual boundary wars. So international law developed this doctrine that those boundaries established by the colonial powers for their colonies as they became independent are sacrosanct. They must be respected by all states. That applies to all states. So the colonial powers established our boundary. The Treaty of Paris was established by two colonial powers, Spain and the U.S. The Treaty of Washington by Spain and the U.S., two colonial powers. And the Treaty with the British by two colonial powers, UK and the US. So this is covered by the ut possidetis juris principle. All states are bound because the policy of international law is to preserve peace and stability. The boundary wars are the most dangerous wars because that's perpetual. So they said nobody will ask for unless both sides agree, you cannot change your boundary. That's the ut possidetis juris principle. And Malaysia is bound because Malaysia just inherited Sabah, North Borneo from the British. The US is bound because it was a party to the treaty. And China is bound because China submitted this judicial admission to the Hague Arbitral Tribunal. China submitted an official document saying that Philippine territory is governed also by the Treaty of Washington. It's bound. That's the highest form of admission. A judicial admission is the highest form of admission under the law. So China is bound, Malaysia is bound, the US is bound, Spain is bound, UK is bound.
Justice, can China withdraw that submission?
Wala na. We
Baka
already
sabihin niya
accepted it.
Balitodo.
And it's not
Balitodo.
only
Hindi pwede.
you go to the Chinese embassy website here,
Yes.
the Philippines, you will see the same statement. Philippine territory is governed by three treaties. They cite our
Yes.
1935 Constitution. It says that, three treaties. You go to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, the same. They also state there, Philippine territory is governed by the three treaties. So they in fact reinforce our claim without knowing it, because they did not read anymore the text of the treaty because they relied on our legal luminaries. They relied on Stelito Mendoza, Father Bernas, and Enrile. So they said, oh, these are the legal luminaries of the Philippines. Their territory is limited to the treaty lines. Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys are outside. We're done.
Okay.
Anong possible
You go to their
counter-narrative
website, it's
nila
there.
dyan?
Ha?
Justice, anong possible counter-narrative ng China dyan? Because they
Wala.
are saying, they are claiming historical rights to almost the entire South China Sea. What might they be able to present to the
No.
world na, ay mali yan?
Under international law, you cannot claim historical rights. Wala na. Pag historical rights, Mongolia should claim the entire China because the Mongols invaded, ruled China for 99 years.
Or
And
Rome.
Italy now will claim entire Europe.
Or Greece.
Or even Spain and Portugal will claim each half of the world. So, tapos na yan eh. Because the rule now is under the decolonization process of the
Yeah.
United Nations, it's now the will of the people. If you are a former colony of the colonial powers, you have a right to self-determination. Ngayon, the principle now is right to self-determination.
Okay.
Kaya in the Sabah dispute, we asked the UN to conduct a referendum. And the referendum was in fact conducted, and they favored to join Malaysia. But we said
Malaysia.
there was no free, there was no education, there was no campaign. Yun ang ating sinasabi. But the principle is self-determination now. Wala na yung historical. Kasi pag historical, the entire Europe will belong to Italy.
Okay.
Okay.
Justice Antonio Carpio, thank you for joining the Story Conference.
Thank
Thank you,
Justice.
Justice. Very enlightening.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Ronald. And thank you for this opportunity to explain this very important.
Yes.
That is for me,
Yeah.
that is the highlight of the speech of the president. That's why I said music to my ears.
Hindi,
Yeah.
hindi music kaya Secretary Enrile.
Okay.
Okay, there was a lot, no,
Yes.
to unpack
Yeah.
from that interview with former Justice Antonio Carpio. But now we have to move on to another story, still somehow related to China. Joining us is Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. Senator, welcome to the Storycon.
Good afternoon, Patrick, Ronald, and Ami. Good afternoon to you.
Good
Good
afternoon,
afternoon,
Senator.
Okay, Ronald, Ami,
Yeah.
you want to throw the first question?
Yes, Senator, there's a proposal now. I think more senators have joined the proposal of Senator Ontiveros to declare Pogos as a threat to national security. Can you expound more on this proposal? You're asking the president already to declare Pogos a threat to national security.
Yes,
Pwede na
because
bang-
the president is the chairman of the National Security Council. And
Yes.
just to give context to that, yesterday we had an executive session on the Banban Pogo Hub that was
Yes.
created a few months ago. And not to divulge any of the details, but just broad strokes. The security agencies as well as the intelligence agencies reported that Pogos have already managed to increase their influence to different personalities and groups, particularly political personalities, enforcement groups and enforcement agencies, as well as local criminal syndicates. If we remember, Pogos are run by foreign criminal syndicates, and based on their intelligence, they are now aligning themselves with local criminal syndicates. We still have local criminal syndicates such as drug syndicates, kidnap for ransom, and they're now aligning themselves together. And because of that, because of the big money flows that is coming from outside of the Philippines, they are using that large sum of money to increase their influence to different groups, and that can also cascade to political influence as well as geopolitical influence. So that's why, in summary, we recommended to the National Security Council representative to already bring this up during the council meeting and declare Pogos as a national security threat, because once they get a foothold to all our decision makers, then it's very difficult now to fight Pogos or to untangle all of the criminal activities of Pogos, because they have deeper influence in our government system.
Senator,
Any
will that happen?
indication on whether the president is amenable to this proposal?
Well, the discussion was only yesterday, but we sounded we made it very clear. The senators made it very clear to the NSC to take this up and discuss this extensively. This information didn't come from us, senators. This information came from the executive side, particularly the intelligence instrumentalities of government. So they can call them, they can ask for a briefing, and these guys will tell them exactly what they've seen and exactly what Pogos can do to our country in terms of influence and damage.
Senator, we're going to have a midterm election in a few months. The filing will happen in 4 months. Ito bang proposal nyo ay pwedeng mangyari before the midterm election to declare Pogo as a national security threat and to provide laws to make it implementable? Dahil kung batay sa mga sinasabi nyo, kung hindi ito mangyayari before the midterms, yung midterms can be shaped by Pogo politics. Dahil with the huge billions of earnings ng mga Pogos, it can shape yung contours ng next election. So mahalaga na ito ay ma-implement before the election.
You're
Yeah.
absolutely correct, Ronald. In fact, yesterday, in our discussion, and I've raised this many times, no? The Pogo hub in Banban is no small development. We asked professional engineers to survey the place and to run a costing of the place. And, and 6.1 billion pesos was plowed in to build that Pogo Hub in Banban. That's a 10-hectare property. There's a shopping mall. There's condominiums, and there are 37 buildings in that Pogo Hub. 6.1 billion was plowed in. And the concerning part is government did not detect anything in terms of money flows. We asked the Anti-Money Laundering Council, their representative yesterday, if they have detected anything, any money laundering activities, because when we were doing our own investigation, we couldn't find any trace on how the 6.1 billion landed on our shores. We couldn't also find any trace who built the facilities. And we were very disappointed with the answers of the Anti-Money Laundering Council because, first of all, they couldn't trace where the money, how the money came in, and they couldn't also trace who the money, who received the money and dispensed the money during the construction stage. And it's quite disappointing because the job of Anti-Money Laundering Council is to detect all of these things. But my point of the matter there is big sums of money is coming into our country undetected, and that can be used for whatever purpose, to build more Pogo hubs, but definitely it will also go to political personalities and other personalities in order to gain protection for their illegal activities.
Okay, Senator, what comes after a declaration of Pogos as a national security threat? Does this dovetail to deportations, closures, and what else?
I think the simple process will be, once it's declared as a national security threat, the president has the power to cancel all the existing licenses and, of course, prevent future licenses from being issued. And then they will probably have a wind down period. For example, deportation, not deportation, but canceling of work permits. Those who are working in Pogos with work permits, they will definitely be asked to leave the country. Of course, the illegal ones will be deported. And then the licenses, which is the document that legitimizes Pogos, will all be canceled, and they will no longer have any legal basis to operate in our country.
Senator, how about
Senator,
government officials na involved dito? PAGCOR, AMLA, Philippine National Police, iba pang agencies na in a way supported the creation of these Pogo hubs. Di ba dapat more than foreigners ay dapat maparusahan din sila?
Yeah, definitely. PAGCOR should also be held to account because they're the regulator under the law. In fact, the law that created the tax regime for Pogo, it was very clear that PAGCOR should regulate them. But unfortunately, it's not happening. And one of the legislative proposals that came out from this hearing or from this investigation is to already separate the regulatory function and the operating function of PAGCOR. Right now, it's operating as one. And because of conflict of interest, they're not regulating strictly all of these Pogos coming into our country. Because on one hand, they're earning money, but on the other hand, they're not regulating, because once you start regulating, definitely the operations of these Pogos will be curtailed and revenue will go down. So one of the proposals that we will make in the committee is to already separate the regulatory function from the operating function of PAGCOR. But for this particular case, Ronald, they should be held to account because in the hearing, it came out that they have people in Banban 24/7, and yet almost 800 personnel there didn't have the proper PAGCOR licenses to operate in Pogo facilities.
Kanya nga, Senator, madali namang ma-identify. Sino yung mga BI na nagbigay ng permiso sa pagpasok nitong mga Chinese nationals na to? Sino sa PAGCOR yung nagbigay ng permit? Sino sa Philippine National Police yung nagagwardya dito sa mga Pogo hubs na ito, na sigurado ko meron. So, pwede nang ma-identify na yan immediately. Hindi kinakailangan ng mahabang panahon. Pero parang wala pang lumalabas na mga pangalan.
Yeah, tama ka doon. That will be our focus in the next hearing. Accountability from PAGCOR and itong mga personalities. During the first hearing, hiningi namin yun, no? And to give us all the names that were involved. Because PAGCOR is the regulator. Dapat alam mo lahat ang nangyayari. Especially if you have people there 24/7. Dapat alam mo lahat because they have the power to inspect, they have the power to look at the computers, they have their responsibility is to make sure they have proper licenses. But that didn't happen with this Pogo hub in Banban. And the other Pogo hubs that were raided, we found the same leniency or totally no regulation whatsoever in this with all of these Pogo companies, and because of that, itong mga Pogo companies were left to do their own, and a lot of them just use the license as a front, and behind it are all these scamming activities that they are perpetuating.
Ami?
Senator, are you pushing for a ban on Pogos or on offshore gaming? Kasi I understand PAGCOR is developing its own offshore gaming scheme, hindi ba?
I mean, parang in my analysis, you cannot separate both, because the offshore gaming, the IGL, they call it, no, the internet gaming, are the same operators as Pogos. It's one and the same, no? They just change name, but the operators are still the same, and the people who are applying the IGL licenses are also the same. So it's very difficult to operate it by to separate it by mere changing of the names. So, it's really a regulatory problem. In my opinion, it's a regulatory failure, and maybe to a large extent a regulatory capture because of that conflict of interest.
So you will be pushing also for the shutdown of those ITLs?
Yes.
Ay, inumpisahan na, di ba?
Yeah, my call is to completely ban Pogos in our country because the nature of Pogo by itself is illegal in a sense that a lot of most of the operators and investors in that Pogos come from criminal syndicates. And we have documents to prove that. The intelligence agencies have documents to prove that. That even though you call them legitimate, but the stakeholders or the incorporators all come from shady backgrounds.
Okay, Senator Win Gatchalian, thank you for joining the Storycon.
Thank you.
Maraming
Thank you,
salamat, Senator.
Okay, thank you also, Ami Pamintuan, Editor-in-Chief of the Philippine Star, and Ronald Llamas, a resident political pundit. Thank you for joining the Storycon. Join us again tomorrow at 4 p.m. For the Storycon, I'm Patrick Paez. We are One News, all sides, all the time. This is the Story Conference Group or the Storycon Group.